Part 4 of Oroonoko. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Oroonoko, or the Royal Slave, by Aphra Behn. Part 4. 'Tis not to be imagined the satisfaction of these two young lovers, nor the vows she made him that she remained a spotless maid till that night, and that what she did with his grandfather had robbed him of no part of her virgin honour, the gods in mercy and justice having reserved that for her plighted lord, to whom of right it belonged. And 'tis impossible to express the transports he suffered, while he listened to a discourse so charming from her loved lips, and clasped that body in his arms for whom he had so long languished, and nothing now afflicted him but his sudden departure from her, for he told her the necessity, and his commands, but should depart satisfied in this, that since the old king had hitherto not been able to deprive him of those enjoyments which only belonged to him, he believed for the future he would be less able to injure him, so that, abating the scandal of the veil, which was no otherwise so than that she was wife to another, he believed her safe, even in the arms of the king, and innocent. Yet would he have ventured at the conquest of the world, and have given it all to have had her avoided that honour of receiving the royal veil. 'Twas thus, between 1,000 caresses, that both bemoaned the hard fate of youth and beauty, so liable to that cruel promotion. 'Twas a glory that could well have been spared here, though desired and aimed at by all the young females of that kingdom. But while they were thus fondly employed, forgetting how time ran on, and that the dawn must conduct him far away from his only happiness, they heard a great noise in the otan, and unusual voices of men, at which the prince, starting from the arms of the frightened Imoinda, ran to a little battle-axe he used to wear by his side, and having not so much leisure as to put on his habit, he opposed himself against some who were already opening the door, which they did with so much violence that Oroonoko was not able to defend it, but was forced to cry out with a commanding voice, "Whoever ye are that have the boldness to attempt to approach this apartment thus rudely, know that I, the Prince Oroonoko, will revenge it with certain death of him that first enters. Therefore stand back, and know, this place is sacred to love and me this night. To-morrow 'tis the king's." This he spoke with a voice so resolved and assured that they soon retired from the door, but cried, "'Tis by the king's command we are come, and being satisfied by thy voice, O Prince, as much as if we had entered, we can report to the king the truth of all his fears, and leave thee to provide for thy own safety, as thou art advised by thy friends." At these words they departed, and left the prince to take a short and sad leave of his Imoinda, who, trusting in the strength of her charms, believed she should appease the fury of a jealous king, by saying she was surprised, and that it was by force of arms he got into her apartment. All her concern now was for his life, and therefore she hastened him to the camp, and with much ado prevailed on him to go. Nor was it she alone that prevailed. Aboan and Onahal both pleaded, and both assured him of a lie that should be well enough contrived to secure Imoinda. So that at last, with a heart sad as death, dying eyes, and a sighing soul, Oroonoko departed, and took his way to the camp. It was not long after the king in person came to the otan, where, beholding Imoinda, with rage in his eyes, he upbraided her wickedness and perfidy, and threatening her royal lover, she fell on her face at his feet, and imploring his pardon for a fault which she had not with her will committed, as Onahal, who was also prostrate with her, could testify, that unknown to her he had broke into her apartment and ravished her. She spoke this much against her conscience, but to save her own life 'twas absolutely necessary she should feign this falsity. She knew it could not injure the prince, he being fled to an army that would stand by him against any injuries that should assault him. However, this last thought of Imoinda's being ravished changed the measures of his revenge, and whereas before he designed to be himself her executioner, he now resolved she should not die. But as it is the greatest crime in nature amongst them to touch a woman after having been possessed by a son, a father, or a brother, so now he looked on Imoinda as a polluted thing, wholly unfit for his embrace, nor would he resign her to his grandson, because she had received the royal veil. He therefore removes her from the otan, with Onahal, whom he put into safe hands, with order they should both be sold off as slaves to another country, either Christian or heathen, 'twas no matter where. This cruel sentence, worse than death, they implored might be reversed, but their prayers were in vain, and it was put in execution accordingly, and that with so much secrecy that none either without or within the otan knew anything of their absence or their destiny. The old king nevertheless executed this with a great deal of reluctancy, but he believed he had made a very great conquest over himself when he had once resolved and had performed what he had resolved. He believed now that this love had been unjust, and that he could not expect the gods, or captain of the clouds, as they call the unknown power, would suffer a better consequence from so ill a cause. He now begins to hold Oroonoko excused, and to say he had reason for what he did, and now everybody could assure the king how passionately Amoinda was beloved by the prince. Even those confessed it now who said the contrary before his flame was not abated. So that the king being old, and not being able to defend himself in war, and having no sons of all his race remaining alive, but only this, to maintain him on his throne, and looking on this as a man disobliged, first by the rape of his mistress, or rather wife, and now by depriving him wholly of her, he feared might make him desperate, and do some cruel thing, either to himself or his old grandfather the offender. He began to repent him extremely of the contempt he had, in his rage, put on Amoinda. Besides, he considered he ought in honour to have killed her for this offence, if it had been one. He ought to have so much value and consideration for a maid of her quality as to have nobly put her to death, and not to have sold her like a common slave. The greatest revenge and the most disgraceful of any, and to which they 1,000 times prefer death and implore it, as Amoinda did, but could not obtain that honour. Seeing therefore it was certain that Oroonoko would highly resent this affront, he thought good to make some excuse for his rashness to him, and to that end he sent a messenger to the camp, with orders to treat with him about the matter, to gain his pardon, and to endeavour to mitigate his grief, but that by no means he should tell him she was sold, but secretly put to death, for he knew he should never obtain his pardon for the other. When the messenger came, he found the prince upon the point of engaging with the enemy, but as soon as he heard the arrival of the messenger, he commanded him to his tent, where he embraced him, and received him with joy, which was soon abated by the downcast looks of the messenger, who was instantly demanded the cause by Oroonoko, who, impatient of delay, asked 1,000 questions in a breath, and all concerning Amoinda. But there needed little return, for he could almost answer himself of all he demanded from his sighs and eyes. At last the messenger, casting himself at the prince's feet, and kissing them with all the submission of a man that had something to implore which he dreaded to utter, he besought him to hear with calmness what he had to deliver to him, and to call up all his noble and heroic courage to encounter with his words, and defend himself against the ungrateful things he must relate. Oroonoko replied with a deep sigh and a languishing voice, "I am armed against their worst efforts, for I know they will tell me Amoinda is no more, and after that you may spare the rest." Then, commanding him to rise, he laid himself on a carpet, under a rich pavilion, and remained a good while silent, and was hardly heard to sigh. When he was come a little to himself, the messenger asked him leave to deliver that part of his embassy which the prince had not yet divined, and the prince cried, "I permit thee." Then he told him the affliction the old king was in, for the rashness he had committed in his cruelty to Amoinda, and how he deigned to ask pardon for his offence, and to implore the prince would not suffer that loss to touch his heart too sensibly, which now all the gods could not restore him, but might recompense him in glory, which he begged he would pursue, and that death, that common revenger of all injuries, would soon even the account between him and a feeble old man. Oroonoko bade him return his duty to his lord and master, and to assure him there was no account of revenge to be adjusted between them. If there was, 'twas he was the aggressor, and that death would be just, and Morga his age would see him righted, and he was contented to leave his share of glory to youths more fortunate and worthy of that favour from the gods. That henceforth he would never lift a weapon or draw a bow, but abandon the small remains of his life to sighs and tears, and the continual thoughts of what his lord and grandfather had thought good to send out of the world, with all that youth, that innocence and beauty. After having spoken this, whatever his greatest officers and men of the best rank could do, they could not raise him from the carpet, or persuade him to action and resolutions of life, but commanding all to retire, he shut himself into his pavilion all that day, while the enemy was ready to engage, and wondering at the delay, the whole body of the chief of the army then addressed themselves to him, and to whom they had much ado to get admittance. They fell on their faces at the foot of his carpet, where they lay, and besought him with earnest prayers and tears to lead them forth to battle, and not let the enemy take advantage of them, and implored him to have regard to his glory and to the world, that depended on his courage and conduct. but he made no other reply to all their supplications but this, that he now